Hi, and welcome to the first video on this channel, Panzer History. Today we're going to be talking about the structure of the German army through 1935 to 1945. The German army was a very complex and intricate organization, as is often evident by the misunderstanding of their organizational structure and position within Germany and its government. Being organized into various different branches and having an intricate interaction with the Nazi government, their structure changed many times, and as such confusion has been caused among those not necessarily interested in the field of German military history. This video will attempt to bring some clarity to this topic. Firstly, the German armed forces, collectively known as the Wehrmacht and before 1935 as the Reichswehr, had a very important position in Hitler's regime. Before his rise to power, the German armed forces had been severely weakened by the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles, which limited the German army to a mere 100,000 men, restricted its navy to limited numbers of capital ships and allowed it no submarines at all, and forbade it from having an air force. Meanwhile, throughout his rise to power, Hitler had been amassing a large paramilitary force of volunteers, the Sturmabteilung, who by 1934 had grown to number in the millions. As such, the armed forces were at risk of being threatened, and Hitler decided to solve this problem by conducting the Night of the Long Knives, in which officially 85 high-ranking SA leaders were killed, but estimates range up to 1,000 dead. The remaining 2 million members were forced to leave or join the regular army. This consolidated Hitler's power and brought the Reichswehr under his control. To understand the structure of the German army, we must first look at its position within Germany's government. If we look at this diagram, we can see that the German armed forces were directly subservient to Hitler himself. We can see that the Führer is in charge directly of the High Command of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. In contrast to modern arrangements in democratic countries, the commanders-in-chief and advisors are all military or paramilitary men. This fact highlights the militaristic nature of the Nazi state. Hitler was directly in command of the Army, Air Force, and Navy, and the advisors that did exist included the German High Command, the OKW, which served as the headquarters and command center for the entirety of the armed forces, the Reichsführer SS, or Himmler, who would advise on matters relating to the paramilitary SS organization, and finally the Ministries of Armaments and Defense, which advised on industrial capacity and war production. Overall, one can see that the structure is fairly elaborate, and yet still gives most of the power to the Führer. In this video we will be focusing on the structure of the Heer, or the German army. The army was commanded by the OKH, the Oberkommando des Heeres, or High Command of the Army, and it was separated into different kinds of troops. The first kind of troop was the infantry, the regular foot soldiers. They also include the artillery and various kinds of support forces. The second branch is the Panzerarm, or the tank troops. The third branch is the signal troops, in charge of communications. The fourth branch is the cavalry, in charge of reconnaissance. The fifth branch is the Feldgendarmerie, or military police, in charge of various military policing activities. The sixth branch is the Panzer Grenadiers, or are the Panzer Grenadiers really. They are the mechanized infantry branch. The seventh branch is the Gebirgsjäger, or mountain light infantry branch. The supply troops, the medical service, and finally the pioneers, who are the engineering branch of the army. We're going to take a look at all of these in detail. So the first is the infantry. This is obviously the bulk of the army. This branch would reach to number over 200 divisions by the end of the war, which is ridiculous for a country the size of Germany. It obviously consists of regular foot-based soldiers who are equipped with small arms and are supported by vehicles to aid in transport, artillery, anti-tank guns, engineers, and various different kinds of support forces. The second, quite notable branch is the Panzertruppe, or the tank arm. This was the largest tank arm in Europe at the time, being the brainchild of a few high-ranking generals who were developing German armored doctrine at the time. They were equipped with tanks, assault guns, and motorized artillery and anti-tank guns. They were in charge of almost all the vehicles that Germany ever produced at this time. They also had a distinctive kind of uniform known as a Panzerwrap due to the distinctive shape of the jacket, as can be seen on the picture. Their Waffenfarbe, or branch color, was Panzerrot, or Panzer Red, which is interesting given that most people would see this as pink. The next branch are the signals troops, who dealt with communications between units and command. They were usually attached to other units like infantry or the tanks, and they were known for their extensive use of radios rather than the traditional signal flags or antiquated motorcycle form of delivering orders. Their troop color was yellow, a bright neon shade of yellow, emphasizing the electrical aspect of communications. Arguably the smallest branch in the army was the cavalry. They were obviously the mounted arm on horses, and they served primarily, when they did serve, they served primarily as a patrol reconnaissance branch, and they were really the smallest branch in the army, as they were pretty much superseded by the tanks and the motorized infantry. Their branch color was orange. The Feldgendarmerie, or the military police branch of the army, stayed behind the lines and conducted anti-partisan operations, as well as regular policing and military administration activities. Their uniforms were distinctive in that members of the Feldgendarmerie wore this distinctive ornate silver gorget around their neck. Their standard also differs from the classical standard of German service branches by not being an eagle with a swastika. Its branch color is also orange, but a slightly more intense shade. Another notable branch are the Panzer Grenadiers, or the mechanized and motorized infantry branches of the army. They were large formations that were typically separate from the infantry, but they could support the infantry as well. They were equipped with various kinds of vehicles like half-tracks, trucks, and armored cars. Their branch color was meadow green, which is a neon shade of green as visible on the standard. Another quite famous branch were the Gebirgsjäger, or the mountain light infantry branch. These were specialized alpine troops that were used in the Alps, in the Caucasus, and in Norway, and other mountainous regions around the areas that the Germans were operating. They operated in their own divisions. They were not usually attached to infantry, however they could be. And their uniforms were distinctive in that they wore a Edelweiss patch on their right arm and sometimes an Edelweiss flower on their field caps. They were also usually equipped with a slightly shortened version of the Mauser 98, known as the Alpine Carbine. Their branch color was a darker shade of green. Another branch of the German army was the supply troop, quite famous, this one. They usually followed around the infantry with ammunition, food, and clothing. They were almost always attached to larger formations at the company level, and they were quite famous for being completely ignored by command during the planning of operations, leading to their ultimate failure. Another fairly ignored branch is the medical service, which often cooperated with the German Red Cross. They obviously were in charge of operating field hospitals and hospitals behind the front line, as well as other medical services for the army. Finally, we have the pioneers. As I already mentioned, the word pioneer comes from the German word Pionier, which means military engineer. They were responsible for construction and maintenance of infrastructure for the army. They essentially paved the way for the army to move forward, as well as repaired the damage that had been done in its wake. They had a regular, armored, and mountain pioneer specialization, and their branch color was this very industrial dark shade of black. So that was a quick and not very detailed overview of the German armed branches. Sorry. I didn't go into too much detail. I didn't talk about the divisional organization or how these and where these were used in particular, but I hope this gives you a good overview of their structure in general. If you liked the video, I would appreciate a subscription just to help keep me going and making new videos. In the next video, I will be discussing the reasons for the Polish defeat in the September campaign of 1939. So if you're interested in that, then subscribe and stay tuned for the next video. Thanks.